Hey everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're taking a look at the Frost Death Knight spec on the Shadowlands beta for World of Warcraft. We've looked at loads of different classes and specs already, and over the next week or so we're going to be looking at every, next couple of weeks, we're going to look at every single remaining spec and class in the game. So tomorrow will be Blood DK, the day after that will be Unholy, I think is the plan right now. So yeah, loads of Shadowlands content here on the channel for you to check out. Also, big shout out to Senior Toucan and Anthony Short. Thank you guys. New on Patreon, so thank you for joining and helping support the channel. For everybody, you don't need to actually like donate anything or whatever, but one of the most common questions I've been getting on these videos is what weak auras am I using? What's my UI setup? So I actually did a video on my UI setup that you're welcome to check out. And also, I'm posting all my weak aura strings that I'm using on the beta on Patreon, just for free, so anyone can go on the Patreon page and just grab them, right? So, I mean, they're pretty placeholder. They're not the most advanced things in the world, but essentially the weak aura strings are there to kind of help me play the specs better and help me show you the specs better and make it more understandable for you guys watching the video. So, yeah, hope you guys will enjoy that. Without any further ado, though, let us dive into the Frost Death Knight. Alright guys, and here we are in game. It's a new era, a new age for the Death Knights here at Shadowlands, with allied races now being able to be Death Knights, a new class of Death Knight, as it were. Yeah, we're a Vulpera for a bit of fun. But as we begin all these videos with now, we're going to do start with a quick refresher on what the core rotation, the baseline, the basic rotation of the Frost Death Knight is. What's their basic gameplay? Again, we're going to take a bunch of active talents and not use them, just to show that very, very basic gameplay. And then after that, we'll dive into sections on what is new in Shadowlands, specifically for the Death Knights, for Frost Death Knights. And yeah, then their Covenant abilities, their Legendaries, all that good stuff. So yeah, without any further ado though, let's talk about the basic rotation of the Frost DK. So first of all, you have 6 runes, and then you also have 100 runic power, or you can have up to 100 runic power. You start with 0. You essentially generate runic power every rune that you spend generates 10 runic power. The runes, you can have up to 3 runes recharging at a time, and I think it takes about 10 seconds baseline to recharge a rune, so that does go down with haste, I believe. And essentially, in terms of managing this stuff, you're just going to try not to overcap on runic power, so spend your runic power without going over it for Frost DK. And then you're going to try to always have 3 runes recharging at a time, and that's the basic rule of thumb for what you're going to be doing. How do we actually spend these runes? How do we spend these runes? Well, I have a few different abilities, and we also have several procs which are very important. It's kind of like a Frost Mage, actually, the Frost DK, very dependent on procs. Anyway, the baseline things we can, for 1 rune, we can do Howling Blast, blast the target with a Frigid Wind, which will do a very small bit of frost damage, and it also hits in an AoE for reduced damage, hits everything within 10 yards, and the important thing is that it infects everything with Frost Fever. Now, Frost Fever will do quite a lot of damage. It will do over 2,000 frost damage with this pretty terribly geared character, over 24 seconds, and every time it does damage, it also has a chance to give the Death Knight, the Frost DK, some runic power. So you'll have noticed that I actually generated some runic power there. Now, we're not in combat anymore, so it is draining away, but yeah, this is very important. This is nearly always going to be one of your top priorities, is to maintain that Frost Fever dot on everything around you. It does tons of damage and gives you lots of runic power to play with, so pretty cool. Our other very, very important spender, or runic power, spender, runes and runic power. The rune spender for 2 runes is Obliterate, a brutal attack that's going to do over 1,000 physical damage. Now, this becomes very important when we look at a proc. Okay, so that's our other rune spender. And then the other one to really pay attention to, that's part of your sort of your core gameplay, is Remorseless Winter. This costs 1 rune and has a 20-second cooldown. And this is like your baseline sort of AoE cleave option. It's going to drain the warmth of life from all nearby enemies within 8 yards, doing 800 frost damage over 8 seconds to them, and reducing their movement speed by 20%. So I think baseline you don't use this in single target, but there's quite a lot of like conduits and talents and legendaries and things like that that make this actually very good in single target. Generally speaking, like in a dungeon situation, for the most part, you're going to use this on cooldown. But yeah, that's sort of the core of the runic abilities there, the most important ones. And then to spend our runic power, which we generate, we baseline have 1 important one, ignoring talents, which is Frost Strike. This is the main thing you're going to be spending this on. 25 runic power, chill your weapons with icy power, quickly strike the enemy with both, doing a total of about 800 frost damage. So very simply, we're going to go into combat. We will apply our Frost Fever with our Howling Blast. and get our Remorseless Winter on cooldown. And we got procs and stuff coming in. I'll mention those in a second. But we spend our Runic Power with our Frost Strike. We're just going to Obliterate. And then let's actually mention the procs. You've seen a couple of those. The first one there is Rime. So Obliterate. Ignore the Frost Scythe bit for now. In fact, let me get rid of Frost Scythe and make this. Actually, these are all passive, so never mind. Let's keep Frost Scythe because otherwise stuff is going to be firing off and impacting it. Just bear in mind that Rime, Obliterate has a 45% chance to make your next Howling Blast consume no runes and do 300% additional damage. So if we fire off like 3 Obliterates here, can we get it? There we go. Rime proc, it's up there, last 15 seconds. And then our next Howling Blast. It's going to do quite a bit of damage. It actually did like 870 frost damage to the main guy. And then it did how much? It did 500 to the second guy. So a good bit of AoE damage there. That's going to keep your Frozen Fever, your Frost Fever going. And does good damage in AoE, and it's free. It's totally free with that Rime proc, so that's nice. Then the other very important proc that we have is Killing Machine. So our auto attack critical strikes, let's see if we can get it here, have a chance to make your next Obliterate critically strike, and also in Shadowlands it makes it do frost damage as well. So it will ignore armor, which is pretty big. So that is kind of massive. So, I mean, let's just fire off our abilities here. Okay, there's our Rime proc, so we're going to consume that. Here's a Killing Spree, or Killing Machine, and bam, you can see absolutely massive damage. We did, you know, with our main hand Obliterate hit, it did over 2,000. The offhand did over 1,000. So about 3,000 damage with a Killing Machine Obliterate. It's a massive amount of damage. And that's basically it. So, yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward. I guess we'll keep this on cooldown. We'll try to spend our Runic Power. And yeah, there you go. We'll consume our Rime procs for good damage. Try to keep our 3 runes going at all times. And spend Killing Spree procs when we get them for really big damage with Obliterate. And that's the very, very basic gameplay of the Frost DK. Now, we also have a number of cooldowns that you can actually see up here to add onto it. And these two right here are talents, which we'll come back to another time. But Raised Dead is new. We'll come back to that in the What's New section. Frostworm's Fury, this is a big AoE cooldown. 3 minute, does massive damage. 4,000 frost damage in AoE. That's a new baseline in Shadowlands. We'll come back to that again. Our main cooldown, though, is Pillar of Frost. This has only a 45-second cooldown, so very short CD. And it gives you 20% strength for 15 seconds, and every rune you spend while it's active increases your strength by an additional 1%. So very nice. That's going to like ramp up pretty well, and it's going to just boost all of your damage because strength affects all of your damage. And then our other cooldown is Empower Rune Weapon. This has a 1.8 minute cooldown for Frost DK in Shadowlands specifically. It empowers your rune weapon, gaining 15% haste and generating 1 rune and 5 runic power instantly, and then again every 5 seconds for 20 seconds total. So a nice haste buff and really fueling your resources. And yeah, I mean, again, we pop that stuff together, and you know, we're gonna go in, we'll pop Pillar of Frost, I guess. We'll apply our runic power. Oh, we actually got a Killing Machine proc right off of that. That was pretty dirty. Again, we'll spend with Frost Strike. Spend our Rime procs there, cool. I guess because we're in Cleave, we should be using our Remorseless Winter, get that rolling. And you see our Pillar of Frost has actually run out, and that's sort of some of the core stuff there. Now, I didn't use the Rune Weapon, I didn't use the Frostworm's Fury or the other guys, but a few cooldowns to throw into the mix. On top of that, you also have some defensives, and you have some utility things. And again, I'll try not to cover the stuff that is actually new. In terms of your main defenses, though, you have Anti-Magic Shell, 1 minute cooldown. You make an Anti-Magic Shell for 5 seconds that absorbs 7,000 magic damage and prevents the application of harmful magical effects. Also, whenever you prevent damage, you absorb it with the Anti-Magic Shell. You do get some runic power. This can be actually really good. You can immune certain mechanics, like certain big, really dangerous debuffs. You can prevent them being applied at all with this. So it's pretty nice. Then you have Icebound Fortitude, a 3 minute cooldown. That's going to give you immunity to stun effects and reduce all damage you take by 30% for 8 seconds. So that's like your bigger cooldown that applies to everything, like physical damage as well. You can taunt, of course. You can taunt if you want. I don't think this is going to work against a target dummy, but one of the most iconic pieces of utility, you have Death Grip. 25-second cooldown, 30-yard range. This will pull enemies to you, and also, of course, it will interrupt what they're doing. But that's one of the most iconic Death Knight abilities, just grabbing enemies, yoinking them towards you. You have another rune spender, Chains of Ice, which doesn't do any. It does almost. I have a talent. Does very, very mild damage. In fact, it's hilarious. It doesn't actually say that it does damage there. That's a bug. It probably should. I guess maybe it only does it with stacks. I'm generating 1 stack too quickly here. Yeah, I've got a talent, which is making my Chains of Ice do damage. By default, it doesn't do damage, as you can see, and it reduces movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. You're almost always running with this. Then maybe it will change in Shadowlands anyway. But yeah, it doesn't by default do damage. It's just a big slow. It costs 1 rune, though. I'm going to skip Death and Decay, because that's new. I'm going to skip Death Coil, because that's new. You can raise Dead, raise Ally, which is cool. So 10-minute cooldown. Costs 30 runic power. But it's a battle res. You can res someone in combat with your battle res charges. Res them with 60% health, 20% mana. So it actually reses them at a very substantial level of life. Like, they're quite safe when you battle res them. However, they do res on top of you, so they res in melee, which can be very dangerous for some, in certain circumstances. And it does cost you runic power and have a big cooldown. But there you go. You can battle res, which is nice. And then your baseline movement is Death's Advance. 10 seconds of 35% increased move speed. And you can't be reduced below 100% normal move speed. Also become immune to knockbacks and forced movement effects, which is very cool. And then also a passive bonus, which is always there. You can never be slowed below 70% normal movement speed. Of course, you've got your just standard kick as well. And then I think most of the rest of it is new. You've got Rune Forges, which have, loads of them are new. We'll come back to them. You have Path of Frost, which lets you and your whole team walk on water, or you can like kill people in raids and stuff like that. If there's a drop down into water, which is a commonly used thing in like dungeon and raid design, you can murder your team by popping Path of Frost before they hit the water and kill them. That's always fun. You can also control undead, which can be very useful in certain dungeons. You can actually take control of undead enemies and force them to fight for you for 5 minutes. So again, that could be pretty damn useful in the Shadowlands. Get some like extra benefit out of that. And then you can also make a Deathgate to travel to the Ebonhold to do your rune forging and hang out with other Death Knights, that sort of thing. I think that's all the core stuff for the Frost DK that isn't new. So there you go. Let's dive into the What's New section. What's new for the Frost Death Knight then, guys, in Shadowlands? Well, there's actually quite a bunch of new stuff. Probably the most obvious one, the thing that a lot of people are most excited about is, of course, two-handed Frost Death Knight. It's back, guys. It is back. So after years of being stuck only dual wielding, you can now do your rotation perfectly fine as a two-handed Frost DK. How does this work? Well, this works through your passive Might of the Frozen Wastes. And what I will warn you is that this has some balancing questions. I think more so than some of the other specs. So let me show you this first. While you are dual wielding, your Obliterate and Frost Strike will also strike with your offhand. And each weapon can be engraved with a Rune Forge enchant. When you're using a two-handed weapon, increases Obliterate damage by 25% and increases the chance for your auto attack critical strikes to grant Killing Machine. I mean, so like the whatever, hitting with your offhand weapon and more Killing Machines procs with two-handed weapon, that stuff just balances it out so that it kind of flows together. The big difference is when you're dual wielding, you get 2 Rune Forges. When you got the two-hander, your Obliterate does more damage. Couple of concerns with this then, obviously, is that, well, Obliterate, for example, is only single target, right? Obliterate, big single target hit. If we talent into Frost Scythe, for example, which is your alternate kind of main rune spending spammer ability, and also your Killing Machine consuming ability when you are in AoE, right? So in AoE situations, probably going to use, or you may use Frost Scythe instead of Obliterate quite often if you're talented into it, and you may want to take that talent. That does not currently work with this passive. Now, I feel like this is probably an oversight, and that will be improved. It also appears that Frozen Pulse, which is another commonly taken compatriot or alternative to Frost Scythe, is when you have less than 3 full runes, your auto attacks will radiate intense cold and do some frost damage to all nearby enemies. That also right now doesn't seem to scale up, so you might be forced into taking Avalanche, for example, which should get slightly buffed. But yeah, I expect this row might get balanced, but right now just be aware that it's not that balanced. So that is something of a concern. And of course then just the fact that it comes down to Rune Forges as well, very much so. It's going to depend how good the Rune Forges are. We're going to look at these next because there's a whole bunch of new Rune Forges. So yeah, that is something of a concern. I mean, possibly they could very simply just make it be that with a two-handed weapon, you can put 2 Rune Forges on it, and then everything works well and everything could flow together. But for right now, it seems like they want to go with your Obliterate hits a lot harder with a two-handed weapon. From some single target testing, it worked out fine. The damage was essentially the same. The overall damage was essentially the same. With the dual wield weapons, melee attacks did a lot more damage, and all the frost spells did more damage, because I could have Rune of the Fallen Crusader and Rune of Razor Ice. Razor Ice boosts your frost damage. in with the two-handed weapon and single target, obviously Obliterate did a lot more damage. It did 25% more damage, but the other damage sources were lower. And the issue, I mean, the main issue is we're just looking at AoE, right? In AoE, more of your damage is coming from frost damage and less from Obliterate, so that is the concern. Let's go check out the rune forges though, because, well, that informs this a lot. What are these new exciting rune forges that I can put on? Let's have a look. Okay, so as we look at the rune forge list, you can see there's a whole ton of stuff in here. So the ones that you're obviously familiar with if you played Frost DK, Rune of Razor Ice is still there. You do extra frost damage with your weapon. You stack up, up 3% up to 5 times the frost vulnerability, so that's still there. Fallen Crusader is still there, where you have a chance on attack to heal you for 6% max health and increase your strength by 15% for 15 seconds. Stone Skin Gargoyle is also still there, where you have 5% more armor and increase all stats by 5%. This is really for tanking. You're not really going to use this in Frost DK. What are these other ones then? First up, Rune of Hysteria. This one is pretty enticing and pretty exciting for a Breath of Sindragosa build, so this could be really good. Affixes your rune weapon with a rune that increases maximum runic power by 20, and your attacks have a chance to increase runic power generation by 20% for 8 seconds. So obviously with the Breath of Sindragosa build, what you're trying to do is keep that Breath of Sindragosa going as long as possible, which is a runic power drain. So having more maximum runic power to start off with could be good, and the runic power generation. So this is something that could potentially be very good with that specific Frost DK build. We'll have to see. There's the Rune of Sanguination. Affix your rune weapon with a rune that causes your Death Strike to do increased damage based on the target's missing health, and when you fall below 35% health, you heal for 48% max health over 8 seconds, modifying your rune weapon. Okay, yeah, blah blah blah. So this is interesting. It gives Death Strike sort of an execute mechanic, which is intriguing, and then also gives you a big self heal when you go below 35% health. This could be good for PvP. I mean, you're not going to be using Death Strike all that often as the Frost DK. You'd rather use, Frost Strike, but you can use Death Strike. This could be amazing for solo play, could be great for PvP. Not sure if it's going to be good for your, dungeon or raid play. We'll have to see. Rune of Spell Warding then, again, another strong looking PvP option. You have a rune on your weapon that deflects 3% of all spell damage and has a chance to create a shield that absorbs magic damage equal to 10% of your maximum health. When an enemy damages the shield, their cast speed is reduced by 10% for 6 seconds. So this could be good, potentially, for like blood DKs, tanking magic encounters, though they're kind of rare. This seems like it could be good, again, as like an offhand enchant for Frost DK, though, potentially in some PvP matchups. That could be very strong, so something to keep an eye on. Rune of the Apocalypse doesn't seem great for Frost, more for Unholy, but to point it out, affixes your rune weapon with a rune that gives your ghouls attacks. A chance to apply one of the following debuffs to the target. Death, which reduces healing. War, which increases damage taken from the Death Knight. Famine, reduces damage dealt to the Death Knight. And Pestilence, which slows the target and does damage over time. So obviously an Unholy Death Knight has a ghoul up all the time. As Frost DK, which we'll see in a minute, you can have a ghoul up for 1 minute every 2 minutes. So not as good for Frost, I think. This is more for Unholy. And then finally, one that could be very, very useful for leveling and world content, the Rune of Unending Thirst. Gives you a rune that gives you 10% haste and movement speed and heals you for 5% maximum health whenever you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. Additionally, increases your movement speed while dead by 10%. So while you're dead, you get back to your corpse faster, hooray. But this is obviously going to be fantastic for world questing, just getting that free heal, big chunk of haste, big chunk of move speed. This could even end up potentially being good in some dungeons. We'll have to see. But yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. So on the whole, it's really interesting. I think they finally expanded the rune system. I think there's tons of flavor in here. Again, some of these like Sanguination, Spell Warding could be very strong in PvP. Hysteria could be extremely good with Breath of Sindragosa, Unending Thirst for leveling, and then of course you have still the classic Razor Ice Fallen Crusader ones. So yeah, once again to put it in context, with Might of the Frozen Waste, while you dual wield, you can have 2 runes. While you're two-handed, you're stuck to just 1. So that could be something that, seeing how cool those rune forges are, that could be something that pushes you more towards the dual wield playstyle. So do bear that in mind. If you're getting super hyped about two-handed playstyle, that's definitely a downside to it for sure. Other new stuff then coming for the Frost DK. Plenty of things here actually. First up, very pleasant to see, is baseline now is Frostworm's Fury. This is now baseline. It's a 3-minute cooldown instant cast. You summon a Frostworm who breeds on all enemies within 40 yards in front of you, doing just under 4,500 frost damage and reducing their movement speed by 50% for 10 seconds. So this is a massive burst damage thing. I mean, we typically Pillar of Frost and like Frostworm Fury, or usually drop Frostworm Fury at the end of Pillar of Frost when you've stacked up the strength a bit. But yeah, this does a monstrous amount of damage, huge on-demand AoE burst, so very nice to see that come baseline to the Frost Death Knight. Just looks cool. Just you're summoning in a freaking Frostworm. It's badass. That's awesome. Another nice little thing, which is mostly there, I think, for Frost to tie in with the Night Fae Covenant, which we'll come to, but Death and Decay is now their baseline. A 30-second cooldown, costs 1 rune. You corrupt the targeted ground area, doing about 400 shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. So this does very, very minor damage, like super minor damage. But maybe if there's enough enemies in there, it may be worth it in AoE, but you'll need quite a lot. Whereas this obviously ties directly into like Blood DK and Unholy DK, but it is here for Frost DK, ties in with the Night Fae. Like compared to just, you know, I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it, but maybe. Could be good for AoE. Death and Decay. A mega hype ability here for you guys that are especially into raiding or Mythic Plus. Even PvP, this could be huge. Absolutely huge. Anti-Magic Zone is now baseline. A 2-minute cooldown. Place an anti-magic zone for 10 seconds that reduces spell damage taken by party or raid members by 20%. So kind of putting Frost Death Knight into the same group as the Havoc Demon Hunters with Darkness, the Deep Warrior Specs with their Rallying Cry. You now have a very powerful raid-wide damage reduction for people that stand in it. So it's pretty huge. This could be awesome. This is potentially a very, very, very big reason to bring Death Knights into raiding now, because this could help you get through certain mechanics. Could be amazing, get you through some mechanics in Mythic Plus. So an absolutely monumental increase to Death Knight utility. So awesome to see that one there. Anti-Magic Zone. You also have Lichborn now. This is a 2-minute cooldown. This is now baseline. Was it formerly, I think these were both formerly PvP talents in BFA, Anti-Magic Zone and Lichborn. Lichborn, 2-minute cooldown. Draw upon Unholy Energy to become undead for 10 seconds. Increasing Leech by 10% and making you immune to Charm, Fear, and Sleep. So obviously extremely useful in PvP to ignore those effects. That's super, super good. The little bit of Leech is kind of nice for a bit of extra survivability. And this is going to tie into our other new ability, Death Coil, right? So Death Coil, this is an alternative runic power spender. This has a 30-yard range, costs 40 runic power. Fire a blast of Unholy Energy, doing 561 shadow damage to an enemy, or healing an undead ally for 2,700. Ooh, okay. Here's the combo. You can pop Lichborn, and then you can start spending your runic power to heal yourself. Like right now, I have 22,000 health. So, you know, it's a small bit of healing, but it's kind of nice. It's not going to do as much damage as Frost Strike, so this is kind of like you'd only use this, I think, if you were out of range and really, really needed to do damage to somebody with runic power. Then I guess you could use Death Coil. I think mostly you're just going to use this to heal yourself with Lichborn as like this big extra self-survivability thing, which could be useful in some circumstances. And again, if you can't actually reach the enemy to Death Strike them, people will do the maths and figure out. But I suspect Death Coil to Lichborn, very, very strong from initial look. Tying into, again, Death Coil as well, we have Raise Dead is now baseline for the Frost DK, which is awesome. 2-minute cooldown, raise a ghoul to fight by your side. You can have a maximum of 1 ghoul at a time. It lasts 1 minute. So for 1 minute out of every 2 minutes, you're now going to have a ghoul friend who's going to come in and help you, which is, you know, it's pretty damn cool if you ask me. Let's pep our abilities. Come on. Don't tell me you have a peace treaty with these target dummies. He doesn't. We're just going to fire stuff off a little recklessly. Not really worrying about it too much. But yeah, again, just in terms of let's just hit it for like a few seconds here. We're not using even all our abilities, and we got like Bethis and a Ghost of Talented. We're not using that. But like just in a rough idea, the Risen Ghoul, he's not doing much damage at all, as you can see. Like he's doing, you know, he might do 2 to 5% of your damage, roughly speaking. We obviously had our burst CDs going off there, like Frostworm Fury. Let's say he's roughly about 5% damage increase for the 1 minute. Not bad and kind of fun. A lot of little flavor there. You can have your little ghoul buddy coming and hanging out with you. So I think that's pretty nifty. Tying into this, I'm going to fire off the ability before this guy expires. Bonk. Another new ability. This is Sacrificial Pact. This does cost 20 runic power and has a 2-minute cooldown. You sacrifice your ghoul to do 800 shadow damage to 8 nearby enemies and heal for 25% of your maximum health. So this one is pretty awesome. Obviously, like Unholy DK has this as well, but it's more difficult for them because, you know, their ghoul actually matters. But for you, you can easily sync this up. at the end of that 1 minute of your raised dead every single time, fire off your Sacrificial Pact, or if you just want to fire it off early if there's a good damage situation, that's a good chunk of AoE damage. Again, it's essentially equal to, roughly speaking, a Frost Strike on every enemy up to 8 enemies nearby, and also is a heal for you as well, 25% maximum health heal. So yeah, again, pop it for AoE damage, pop it for heal. It's going to be a pretty decent thing to do when you're in an AoE situation at the end of your ghoul, because your ghoul is going to expire after 1 minute anyway. So yeah, a fun little ability to get in there. I think it's quite cool, quite unique, and yeah, there you are. So those are, again, relatively minor things that are like these new baseline abilities in a sense, but I think you put them together and you're getting a lot of really good new stuff. In fact, I take it back, they're not minor things at all. Like anti-magic zone is absolutely huge. Baseline Frostworm's Fury is awesome as well. Baseline Ghoul is badass, gotta love it. Lichborn, you've got a ton of new tools to play with here as a Frosty K. So I think in terms of baseline abilities, you're very happy. For leveling perks then, there are also some leveling perks which are going to help you out a lot. One minor one, which is quite nice, is there is a rank 2. Actually, it's not going to show up here properly, but there's a rank 2 of Death's Advance. Your Death's Advance is now going to last for 10 seconds. So that's an extra 2 seconds, and it's going to give you 35% movement speed. I don't think this is in BFA. I'm pretty sure this is a leveling perk for Shadowlands, but it's quite minor. But hey, it's a little bit more move speed with Death's Advance, which is always welcome as a very slow class. More importantly then, for the leveling perks for Frosty K that you are definitely getting in Shadowlands, Obliterate gets a rank 2, where it's going to do 20% more damage. That's pretty nice. Empower Rune Weapon is going to get a rank 2 that lowers its cooldown by 15 seconds, which is intriguing. That could potentially sync up with a Conduit, which can also reduce its cooldown further. And that will help you sync up perhaps Empower Rune Weapon with the baseline Pillar Frost cooldown a bit better, because those didn't sync up before. And if those sync up a bit better, then maybe your Empower Rune Weapon, again, if you could reduce it even more, you could have that up every second time you cast Frostworm's Fury, which might be nice. One thing obviously to bear in mind, Breath of Sindragosa, 2-minute cooldown. Obviously, if you're taking Breath of Sindragosa, you're going to combo Rune Weapon with that every single time. So that cooldown reduction won't actually help you there. But it could work well with Ice Cap. It could work well with other stuff. So it is something to look at and keep an eye on. Again, people will theorycraft and figure out with the Conduit exactly what the cooldown on this thing is going to be. But interesting. That's there for Frost. And then finally, something that's a bit more substantial in a way is that Killing Machine. I don't think it shows in the tooltip either. No, it doesn't show. But Killing Machine. Now, if I can, let's go and melee this guy a bit. Makes your, when you consume it, it makes your Obliterate do frost damage, which is awesome. Number one, what happens when Obliterate does frost damage? Well, it does more damage because frost damage doesn't get affected by armor. So that's big. Number two, it makes your Obliterate scale with your mastery. Ooh, so pretty tasty. If we're ever going to get a Killing Machine proc. Come on, let's go. Come on. You know you want to, game. Oh, there we go. We got one. I actually got another one during Breath of Sindragosa, and I couldn't put myself to doing it. Yeah, Killing Machine. Bam! That just did 4,389 damage right there. Pretty beefy. I think we had Unholy Strength up during that. That's the Ruin of the Fallen Crusader. Absolutely massive damage, and again with the frost damage, it's just gonna, you know, it's just gonna scale really, really well. So that's actually a very nice leveling perk that goes there. It makes your mastery better, and again makes mastery really nice for that two-handed Frosty K where your Obliterate's doing more damage anyway. But yeah, massive burst damage with that rank 2 frost damage Killing Machine consuming Obliterate. So there you go. For your talents, there's a few fairly minor changes. One change straight up, which I think is nice, is Runic Attenuation. It now generates 5 runic power. That's up from 3, but they lower the amount of times that it procs per minute. So essentially this just balances it out. It's one of the things that so far I feel that they have balanced out for the two-handed versus dual wield. So essentially, whether dual wield or two-handed, you should generate the same amount of runic power from Runic Attenuation. It's just a balancing thing. It doesn't affect much, but it's there, so just bear that in mind. Blinding Sleet actually got quite a big buff, so this is nice. So this is where you do this AoE disorient, pretty cool. Bam, looks like that. AoE disorient. You can see this, like the cooldown ticking away there, for example, or the debuff ticking away. The nice thing, again, you can see the second debuff A second debuff is a movement speed slow. When blinding sleet ends, enemies are slowed by 50% for 6 seconds. So a pleasant little buff, not a huge deal, but it's certainly going to add into that AoE control and makes it a bit of a better competitor to like Asphyxiate or Death's Reach, for example. So pretty nice. Blinding Sheath, bit of a buff. Blinding Sleet. Frost Scythe, just worth noting, has a target cap, hits up to 5 enemies now. Hypothermic Presence is a new cooldown here. 45-second cooldown. Embrace the ice in your veins, reducing runic power cost of your abilities by 35% for 8 seconds. And this does not trigger the global cooldown. I think definitely the appeal of this is running it with Breath of Sindragosa. So you're going to get, like, you know, use it once in Breath of Sindragosa, then get another cast like in between Breath of Sindragosas, and then probably just delay it for your Breath of Sindragosa once again. So this is just going to help you. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to slow down that Breath of Sindragosa drain. Yeah, pretty nice, right? Kind of cool. That's the main use for it. I don't see it being all that useful outside of that. Like, what I found playing Frost DK was that it can be a struggle sometimes to jump runic power anyway, just with the baseline stuff. I was playing with Obliteration and it was difficult to dump runic power, so I don't know if it's going to be that useful outside of a breath build, but it's there for breath build lovers, so pretty cool. And then, yeah, level 50 got rebalanced a little bit, so Ice Cap now reduces the cooldown of Pillar of Frost with your Frost Strike, Frost Scythe, and Obliterate critical strikes by 4 seconds, up from 3. So that's a buff to Ice Cap. Obviously, Ice Cap took a bit of a hit, seeing as one of your big Azurite traits was Icy Citadel, which gave you a big, massive stat boost after your Pillar of Frost expired. So I'm not sure if Ice Cap is all that good. But it's certainly an option. And then Obliteration is playing really well right now, certainly for single target. We get loads of killing machines, which is great. Probably works well in AoE too. And then you still have Breath of Sindragosa. But yeah, Ice Cap a bit of a buff. I'm not sure if it makes up for losing Icy Citadel though. But they are the talent changes. Small, but kind of nice. Again, Hypothermic Presence is the big new talents to replace Frostworm's Fury going baseline. Okay, and hey, we're going back to a slightly older version here of these videos that I was doing, because Blizzard has created a new realm on the beta, which now enables these level 60 characters, which is fantastic, which means we can actually see the Covenant abilities in action once again, which I'm very happy about. So, for example, with the Kyrians, we can now see them happening, which is great. So, summon Stuart. Let's summon him in. This is the signature ability available to all classes of the Kyrian Covenant. It will give you the Phial of Serenity, which you can consume to restore 15% health and remove all diseases, poisons, curses, and bleeds affecting you. Can't use it right now because I'm at full health. But you can use it once per combat. I think it has a 2-minute cooldown or something, 1-minute cooldown outside of that. Can't remember. But yeah, this is, you know, it's pretty good in those niche circumstances where those things will affect you. And there's quite a few of those floating around in Shadowlands right now. And then the Covenant ability for the Kyrians, for the Death Knights, is called Shackle the Unworthy. This has a 1-minute cooldown, 30-yard range, instant cast. Admonish your target for their past transgressions, reducing the damage they deal to you by 5%, and doing 2,300 arcane damage over 14 seconds. Additionally, while it is active on an enemy, rune spending attacks reduces cooldown by 4 seconds. So let's go into this. Let's put like our dot on him right now. We'll pop some stuff, and let's go. Shackle the Unworthy. Bam, there it is. That's the effect. Kind of cool. Again, this is not necessarily the perfect gameplay, perfect build, or anything like that, but just to give you an idea, you can see the cooldown ticking away down there. I'll fire that off because I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to fire it off otherwise. Okay, and again, with this low level of haste, we're going to get this back in a second. Shackle the Unworthy again, and yeah, kind of nifty, right? Kind of nifty. So let's see exactly where we end up once this runs out. Coming up in 1 second here. As you can see right there, in the 18-second duration we actually took Shackle the Unworthy the second time down to about a 10-second cooldown. So you're going to have very, very high uptime on this. The downside is, as you can note, you know, I guess if you lose uptime on your target, you're not spending your runes, it's going to have a longer cooldown. But more importantly, it is by default only single target. Now, there is a potency conduit. We're going to be looking at all the conduits actually later on this video. We've been starting the other videos looking at them very quickly. But let me just point this out to you now. There is a potency conduit for the Kyrian called Proliferation. This is important because it gives Shackle the Unworthy. Again, I'm not sure if these numbers are quite correct or how they're going to work. What it says right now is that it gives it a 100% chance to spread to a nearby enemy each time it deals damage. Again, that may not be correct. It may start at like 20% and then go up to 100%. I'm not sure. But Either way, it is worth noting, important, that although this appears to be a simply single target and therefore very limited ability, you can use one of your conduits. You can use that to make it work in AoE too. So yeah, there you go. I mean, I would say this one is relatively boring. It's just going to do a dot. You need to put a conduit onto it to make it AoE. So this one, for me, is probably the weakest of the Death Knight ones. Next up, we have the Night Fae. The Night Fae are very, very cool. So their signature ability is called Soul Shape. This is a 1.5 minute cooldown. You turn into a Vulpin, teleporting 15 yards forward, giving you 50% movement speed for 12 seconds. And you can reactivate this to blink again. It becomes an ability called Flicker. So boom, there we go. It's actually going to last forever because we're in a resting area right now, a rest area. Normally it won't do that. It only lasts for 12 seconds. But this is awesome. Obviously, as a Death Knight, you are extremely immobile, so this is a massive perk, a massive benefit to have. Soul Shape is going to be super welcome for you. Then the Covenant ability is very cool. It's called Death's Due, and this actually, it replaces Death and Decay. What does it do? Well, it does basically the same amount of damage. It has a 30-second cooldown, still costs one rune. It does 400 shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. So not much damage, really. Not much damage at all. However, enemies that are hit by this will do 1% reduced damage to you, and this will stack up to maximum of 15% reduced damage, and it also transfers that to you as strength as well. So it's going to give you a stacking strength buff, and it's going to reduce the damage that enemies do. It's actually not gonna work here properly against these target dummies. However, you will see in the dungeon footage that I was running with this, and yeah, it's pretty nice. This has very specific synergies with Unholy and with Blood Decay that you don't have with Frost. However, it is still a very short cooldown. It's a very short cooldown. I mean, with Ice Cap, for example, it's going to be very easy to have Pillar of Frost up with this frequently. If you use this on cooldown, it will sync up with Breath of Sindragosa every 2 minutes. It will sync up with your Frostworm's Fury. Either way, being able to build up a whole bunch of extra strength, you stack the strength bonus on top of the Pillar of Frost, stack it on top of like the Gathering Storm, which is stacking up the damage of Remorseless Winter, fire off a Chains of Ice with high stacks of this, high stacks of Pillars of Frost, fire off Frostworm's Fury with lots of stacks of Pillars of Frost, and Death's Due. There's a lot of potential combos there, so I think this one is actually looking pretty solid, pretty damn solid for the Frost DK. And then your potency conduit for this one is called Withering Ground. It will make Death's Due do 15% additional damage. That goes up to 50% additional damage, which is okay for AoE. I guess it's not too bad if you're doing some bigger AoE pulls, but this one's not that great. So this could be a nice one, potentially, for if you like the normal Death Knight potency conduits, the normal Frost DK potency conduits. Just go, you know what? I'm not going to bother with this one on my Frost DK. Maybe I'll use that on Unholy. Maybe I'll use that for Blood. For Frost DK, I'm going to take my other potency conduits, and this is still going to be a really good perk to the way I'm doing damage anyway. So pretty cool. Next up, we have the Venthyr. With the Venthyr, you get the Door of Shadows. Door of Shadows as your signature ability. 1 minute cooldown, 1.5 second cast, went through the shadows with a 35-yard range, and you teleport there. Point and click, boom, and teleport. Pretty cool, right? Very, very cool. So that's, again, another chunk of mobility, very welcome for Frost DK. And then their Covenant ability for the Death Knights is Swarming Mist. This is a 1 minute cooldown, costs 1 rune. A heavy mist surrounds you for 8 seconds, increasing your dodge by 10%. It does 200 shadow damage every 1 second to all enemies within 10 yards. And every time it does damage, you generate 3 runic power, up to a maximum of 15 runic power. But, I mean, you'll see the skeleton AoE. So in AoE, it's going to do pretty good damage. And it's, like, against 2 targets, I'm getting 6 runic power. 6 runic power every single time that it ticks. So immediately for Frost Death Knight, you're thinking 1 minute cooldown. Okay, I'm gonna have this up every time I want to use a Breath of Sindragosa. And in AoE with 2 targets, that's generating 6 runic power every second. You know, with 5 targets, that's gonna be generating 15 runic power every second. Pretty good. You know, 15 runic power, that essentially 15, I'm going to drain just 1 runic power then with Breath of Sindragosa for those 10 seconds, so long as I have 5 targets to hit. That's pretty tasty. So this has some very possible and powerful interactions with the Frost DK, with Breath of Sindragosa. Without Breath of Sindragosa, not as appealing at all, I would say, but it's still, you know, it's going to be a good bit of shadow damage. It has a mild defensive benefit with dodge, which could be useful for PvP. And yeah, I mean, just a bit more runic power. It's not too bad. The conduit for this one is called Impenetrable Gloom. Swarming Mist damage and dodge chance is increased by 5% for the first 4 seconds. It actually goes up to a bonus of 30% at maximum rank. So 30% more damage, 30% more dodge for the first 4 seconds. You know, the dodge, not all that useful, I would say, for Frost DK, but it's not terrible. Damage bonus, again, it's kind of just, it doesn't have any particular interaction, but it's kind of nice for a bit of extra burst damage. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. It's certainly the runic power generation is like the special thing about this one, I think. And that could be very good with Breath of Sindragosa. But apart from that, you know, yeah, that's the strength. That's the strength, but also potentially a weakness. And then finally, we have probably the most flashy ability, which is Abomination Limb with the Necrolords. A 2-minute cooldown. You sprout an additional limb for 12 seconds. Every 1 second, it's going to do 240 shadow damage to all nearby enemies, and it will pull an enemy to your location if they're further than 8 yards away from you. So it will do more burst damage than the Swarming Mist, which was doing about 200 per tick. This is going to do 240 per tick. Of course, this is a 2-minute cooldown compared to the 1-minute cooldown. This is 12 seconds compared to the 10 seconds of Swarming Mist. So it's more burst damage on the 2 minutes, but if you know, over a 2-minute cycle, because you get 2 casts of Swarming Mist, it's going to do more. The really cool thing about this, though, is the grab effect. You can see that grab effect, and look at the animation. It's a cool animation. But that grab effect is what's really appealing here, is that, yeah, enemy that's further than 8 yards, and I think within 20 yards of you, is going to be grabbed and pulled towards you. So this is about to be the worst nightmare of every caster spec, every range spec. Every spec, really, in PvP is going to hate Death Knights with the Abomination Limb, just yoinking them back every second when they're trying to escape, just yoinking them back, yoinking them back, yoinking them back. Absolutely nutty. So that is really, really cool. Again, it does really good burst damage on a 2-minute cooldown in AoE, which could be great. Like if that's what you're bringing the Frost Death Knight for, is going, okay, we're building around that 2-minute burst window of Breath of Sindragosa. We want something that bursts really hard every 2 minutes. Breath of Sindragosa, Abomination Limb could be a good combo. Obviously, gripping things in is not going to be always useful in PvE, but sometimes it will be, and it could help you group up casters with your team and stuff like that. So, yeah, a very interesting one with Abomination Limb. The conduit for this one, the potency one, is Brutal Grasp. It's going to do 50% increased damage to enemies it pulls to you. That goes up to 125% bonus damage. I would say in PvE, that's unlikely to be that useful. It's unlikely that there's going to be enough enemies that you're going to be pulling something every second. In PvP, this could be very, very spooky, though, and could really freak players out that, you know, do not want to be on top of the Frost Death Knight. They want to kite you. They want to get away. But massive, massive penalty to trying to do it. Abomination Limb is going to just rip them apart. So, yeah, pretty enticing, pretty intriguing there. The signature ability is Fleshcraft. It's a 4-second channel with a 2-minute cooldown. And you form a shield that gives you, it's a 20% maximum health shield. Max HP. So I've got 22k right now. Gave me a shield for 4,500. If you channel this near corpses, it becomes more powerful. It can be up to 50% of your maximum health as a shield. So again, I think this one has an awesome effect. Looks really badass. I think this one has the potential to be pretty decent as well. Like, the shield lasts for a long time. You could channel this between packs and Mythic Plus. You could use it for, you know, surviving certain one-shot mechanics, stuff like that. So it's got some usage to it, though I might lean towards the movement stuff more. So yeah, on the whole, I actually think that the Covenant abilities for the Frost DK are looking really good. You know, going backwards, I think, you know, the Necrolords, the defensive of Fleshcraft is okay. I certainly think that the Abomination Limb is a very attractive 2-minute cooldown, massive burst damage on 2 minutes in AoE, and really cool utility. The weakness, of course, being that it's a longish cooldown and it's not as good at all in single target. You have the Venthyr. They give you the Door of Shadows teleport, which I think is great for mobility, really powerful for the DK in particular. And the Swarming Mist gives you a short cooldown, 1-minute cooldown AoE burst CD, which also gives you lots of runic power, which can be good with certain talents for Frost DK, though I think is fairly weak without those talents. And a little bit of dodge is kind of nice for some PvP encounters and some solo play as well. The Night Fae, I think, are also really good. Soul Shape is an amazing mobility cooldown, which I think is going to be super welcome for Frost DK. And then Death's Due is pretty cool as well. It's going to make you actually use Death and Decay more, which is nice. And it's going to give you that strength bonus, which is just, you know, it's going to have a very high uptime, and that strength bonus stacked with your other strength bonuses like Pillar of Frost, your Rune of the Fallen Crusader, and so on, and just the ramping damage you can get with like Remorseless Winter and Chains of Ice and blah blah blah. That could be pretty nice for some big, chunky burst damage and kind of synergize with your core gameplay. So that's kind of cool. And I'd say the Kyrian one is probably the weakest one. It's just a bit of damage with a short cooldown single target dot. You can conduit it up to do AoE, but yeah, this one is the least impressive to me, but the other three I think are very, very good. So that's the Frost DK Covenant ability. For our legendaries then, for the Frost Death Knight, there are 4 generic ones, and then there are 4 Frost Death Knight specific ones. So first up, this first one is called Death's Embrace. This increases the duration of anti-magic shell by 100%, and any damage it absorbs heals you. So this could be very nice for PvP in particular. Get 10 seconds potentially out of anti-magic shell. If you're going up against dot classes like Shadow Priests or Affliction Warlocks, they're going to be very, very annoyed when you pop your anti-magic shell and stop them dotting you for 10 seconds. So that's kind of cool. It's definitely niche, not something you're going to run all that often, I think. Next up, this one is called Grip of the Everlasting. For 3 seconds after casting Death Grip, you can cast the spell a second time without regard for its cooldown. So again, quite niche. Maybe there's a couple of PvE encounters where this matters. In PvP, it could be kind of nice to disrupt people in particular. But again, it's utility based and it's quite circumstantial. This one here is called Pheromones, which is hilarious. And I think this one's a bit weaker, perhaps, for Frost DK than the others, but does have nice synergy with the Night Fae Covenant. You and your minions, so your raised dead, are going to get 10% haste while you're inside your Death and Decay, and enemies damaged by your Death and Decay have a chance to cower in place for 3 seconds. So I think this one's actually pretty good. Again, especially with the Night Fae where you're actually using Death and Decay. Outside of that, you're not going to use Death and Decay all that often as Frost, but it does give you like another crowd control tool, which is very tasty for Mythic Plus, I think. Not great in PvP. People won't be in your Death and Decay too much, but for Mythic Plus, awesome. More AoE disruption is pretty good, and obviously getting 10% haste while you're in that Death and Decay is really nice as well. 10% haste is more damage, so this one is very attractive. Like I said, it's better for the other DK specs, but still could be good for Frost. And then finally, for the generic ones, we have this one, which is called Super Strain. Your Frost Fever, Blood Plague, and Virulent Plague also apply the other 2 diseases at reduced effectiveness. So essentially you get a weaker Blood Plague and a weaker Virulent Plague. I believe Blood Plague will heal you for some of the damage it deals, and Virulent Plague will, I think it does some AoE whenever targets die. So this one, it could end up as a numbers thing. It could end up doing decent damage, because those are damage over time effects. They're pretty okay. We'll have to see what the numbers say. I think this is maybe a bit more appealing for the other Death Knight specs, because Frost Fever obviously gives runic power generation, so that's kind of nice for the other 2 specs. But I mean, it could be okay in terms of numbers. It might end up being okay, but it's not too exciting gameplay wise, I think, for Frost. So there you are. For the Frost Death Knight specific, again, we have 4 legendaries here. The first one is called Absolute Zero. Frostworm's Fury has a 50% reduced cooldown and freezes all enemies hit for 3 seconds. Pretty nice, right? It brings it down to a 1.5 minute cooldown, which is cool. Get it off twice as often. What's not to love about that? Freezing all enemies hit for 3 seconds, a bit of extra CC. So this could be good in PvP for more frequent massive blow up windows, massive nuke damage windows. It could be great again for Mythic Plus or certain raid encounters, because it's a big chunk of AoE damage. Who doesn't love throwing a Frostworm? Okay, we couldn't really see it because I threw him into the wall, but he's cool, so yeah, that's pretty nice. The next one here is called Biting Cold. Remorseless Winter's damage is increased by 15%, and the first time it deals damage to 3 different enemies, you gain Rhyme. So again, I think this one's pretty nice, right? It's just gonna smooth out your AoE rotation a little bit. Like you pull a new pack, you can just pop Remorseless Winter, get the free cast of Rhyme, and fire of Howling Blast with Rhyme, and fire that off, and kind of just get that proc going right at the start, which is, I think that's pretty cool. Remorseless Winter doing more damage. That obviously synergizes with Gathering Storm. There's a Conduit that synergizes with it as well. So you're probably forced to take those if you go with this legendary, pretty much. It's just going to be a good AoE damage legendary. It's going to be very weak, I think, in single target locations. So probably good for some Mythic Plus. We'll see. Then we got a couple that are better, I think, in sort of single target. First, we have this one called Kultira's Favor. Obliterate does 10% more damage and has a 15% chance to refund 2 runes, which obviously means that you can just do another Obliterate. So this one is, it's a low proc chance. 15% chance is pretty low, but it's going to feel good when it does proc, that's for sure. It's going to really up your single target damage with more Obliterates firing out. Also, this does have particular synergy right now, I think, with the two-handed Frost DK, because your Obliterates are doing 25% more damage. So this could be very attractive, two-handed with Kultira's favor here. That could be a very powerful single target build for the Frost DK, and also works very well with the aptly named Obliteration talent, where with Pillar Frost active, you're generating way more killing machines. So you're going to do even more damage. So yeah, some intriguing stuff happening there, I think. And then finally, a bit more of a generic Obliterate one. Obliterate has a 15% increased chance to trigger Rhyme, and Howling Blast, it says in the tooltip, generates 34,000 runic power, which, considering you can have 100 max, that's an awful lot of runic power with when you spend a Rhyme proc. I believe it's only 15 runic power that it generates, but that's still pretty good. That's still nice. And yeah, I think that's pretty good. That this is going to be, still good in single target. It's still good for single target. Rhyme is going to do a decent chunk of single target damage, and also generating runic power. It smooths out your rotation. It gives you more buttons to press. It helps fuel your frost strikes. It's all pretty good. And it's also still good in AoE as well, because those Rhyme procs. Those Rhyme procs are going to help you do more AoE damage. So I think that's still pretty decent. Obviously, I say one thing to watch out for here is that right now there is no support for Frost Scythe. And again, Frost Scythe is the talent you take, which is sort of like to replace Obliterate in AoE scenarios. So if you want to spec into Frost Scythe and use that instead of Obliterate, and let's say like 5 target AoE, both of these legendaries right now are going to do literally nothing for you. They only work with Obliterate. So I think, again, in the dungeon footage you're going to see in a short little bit here, I was running with the Obliterate doing more Rhymes, and the Rhymes generating runic power. I was running with that, and then I just didn't take Frost Scythe. And I think it still did well in the dungeon. It still worked, but do just bear in mind a little bit of perhaps anti-synergy there to watch out for. So there you go. Final thing to look at then for the Frost Death Knight that's coming new in the Shadowlands are the Conduits. So there are 3 different types of Conduits. We already saw some of the specific ones that go with the Covenant abilities. So check the Covenant ability section if you want more info on those. But you're going to have Endurance Conduits, which boost your survivability, Finesse, which boosts your utility, and Potency, which boosts your damage. And they're going to slot into a Soulbind tree. You should see an example in the background to give you an idea for the path you could take and the different Conduit slots you might unlock on a given path. Let's look at Endurance ones first. The first one we have is Hardened Bones. While Lichborn is active, the damage you take is reduced by 5%. That actually scales up to 15%. Lichborn's a 1 minute cooldown, so it's it's a 2 minute cooldown with a 10-second duration. So, turning that into an extra strong defensive, I think is pretty good. That could be useful for PvP, could be useful for some PvE, an extra little bit of defense. It's not the strongest thing in the world, but it's kind of nice little perk. Insatiable Appetite is next. That strikes minimum healing is increased by 1%, and that goes up to 8%. So again, this could be okay. It's healing you for a minimum 10% of maximum health by default, so I guess that can scale up to 18% maximum health healing by default. Again, it could be nice. I'm not too sold on this one. Again, we'll see what the numbers actually end up being, but seems a little underwhelming, but okay. And then finally, Reinforced Shell. This is the most exciting one, I think. Anti-Magic Zone's radius is increased by 10%. Awesome. And the duration is increased by 1 second. This actually scales up to 18 seconds. So I think this one is very nice. Like, Anti-Magic Zone's already lasting for 10 seconds. You can imagine in PvP, like your healers being tunneled in Arena. You throw down that Anti-Magic Zone. If you're against like a double caster comp, like let's say against like an Ellie Shaman and a Destro Lock or something like that, you throw that anti-magic zone down and your healer could just sit in that anti-magic zone for 18 seconds with 20% reduced magic damage. That's pretty sick. And this could also really help for some dungeon mechanics, some raid mechanics. I don't know if the extra duration would be insanely extra useful, but who knows? In certain situations, it certainly will be. So you will sometimes be using this one. It could be very strong. And certainly won't say no to the extra radius, just makes it a bit more usable. So I think that's pretty nice. For the Finesse Conduits then, there are 4. Chilled Resilience is first. Icebound Fortitude's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. It actually goes as high as 60 seconds. So that will bring Icebound Fortitude from a 3-minute cooldown to a 2-minute cooldown. So that's just fantastic in every situation. It is your, most generally applicable defensive. So that's awesome. Fleeting Wind is next. Death's Advance will give you an additional 10% move speed for the first 3 seconds. This scales up to 30% additional move speed for the first 3 seconds. So that's nice. It brings the Shadowlands basic 35% Death's Advance up to a 65% speed Death Advance for 3 seconds. Gives you a bit more burst mobility, which I think is good for dodging out of mechanics and stuff like that. Like, you might not always be talented into Wraith Walk, so hey, more mobility is always good for a pretty slow spec. So yeah, that one's nice. I like it. Spirit Drain is up next. Successfully interrupting an enemy with Mind Freeze gives 10 runic power. Again, the ranks on this one on Wowhead are a bit wonky. I mean, let's say it could be about 4 times as good, it looks like. So max rank maybe give you 40 runic power. This could be very strong with Breath of Sindragosa. Very strong. Mind Freeze is a 15-second cooldown, and you should certainly get 15-second Breath of Sindragosas out. So if you can get 2 kicks in there, 2 Mind Freezes in there, that's an extra potential 80 runic power, it looks like, which is a huge amount. That's an extra few seconds of Breath of Sindragosa. So that looks actually pretty insane. And also, obviously, in PvP or even without Breath of Sindragosa, it's still more runic power, it's more damage. Should be pretty okay, I think. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, one to keep an eye on for the Frost Death Knight. And finally then, Unending Grip. Death Grip slows enemy movement speed by 25%. It says for until cancelled, so I'm not exactly sure how long this is going to last. Let's assume it's like, 4 to 6 seconds, something like that. Probably pretty reasonable. Let's say like 5 seconds, shall we say. So like 25% slow for let's say 4 seconds maybe, or 60% slow for 4 seconds. It's still pretty good. I think that's still pretty nice. Gonna be great for PvP, not so good for PvE, but in PvP you're gonna be, I mean, if you have Abomination Limb and you have this Unending Grip, there's a lot of specs that are going to hate you. Like, they will hate you so much. So yeah, kind of cool. For the Frost Death Knight, Potency Conduits, then, these are specific for Frost DKs. We have 4. The first is Accelerated Cold. Empower Rune Weapon recharges 5% faster, and the haste amount is increased by 10%. It looks like that scales up to 15% faster cooldown reduction, or perhaps it's the haste that scales. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, bearing in mind that Empower Rune Weapon is now a 1.8 minute cooldown, you guys can do the maths and figure this out. It should make it easier to sync up with Pillar of Frost, which is nice, but obviously the cooldown reduction is kind of useless if you're running Breath of Sindragosa, so it's kind of a strike against the Breath of Sindragosa build. So if you hate Breath of Sindragosa, this might be better for you, and this might enhance the other optional talents instead. Which is cool. And obviously getting more haste is awesome. It's going to make your cooldown windows better. You're going to pop off more. So quite an intriguing one, for sure. Quite an intriguing one. Biting Cold is next. Remorseless Winter does 2% increased damage to enemies it hits. That stacks up to 10 times. And the bonus actually goes up to 9% per hit. So a maximum rank of the Conduit here, you'd be getting 9% increased damage per hit. This is really going to up the damage of Remorseless Winter. Obviously in AoE, it's going to be fantastic. And this has particular synergies, of course, with the Gathering Storm talent, which is, every rune you spend during Remorseless Winter increases the duration and its damage. Awesome. And also there's your Legendary that combos with that as well, which is called, I can't remember what it's called, but it makes Remorseless Winter, again, do 15% more damage. So you could stack those things up, and suddenly Remorseless Winter becomes a very, very powerful AoE damaging ability. So yeah, this Conduit, if you're running that Legendary or the talent, could probably be considered mandatory, certainly for AoE. So there you are. Eradicating Blow is next. I actually really like these last 2 conduits here. Eradicating Blow is the first one. Obliterate increases the damage of your next Frost Strike by 10%, stacking up to 2 times. And that goes up to 25%. So one of the slight issues I found while playing with Frost DK was that you can end up with like way too much runic power, and it can be a bit of a, you're kind of spending runic power just to not overcap. It can be a bit weird sometimes. I think this gives it, or should give it, a very nice flow where you're really, really going to want a Frost Strike after 2 Obliterates. So it's going to give you like a good flow to the spec. It's going to feel rewarding. Like, your Frost Strike's going to do 50% more damage after 2 Obliterates, which is nutty. So that's going to, I think, help with the obliteration talent gameplay and stuff like that. I think it's going to make it nice. I think it should feel really good. So I'm excited for that one. I think that's going to be a fun gameplay enhancer. And then finally, Unleashed Frenzy. Frost Strike increases your strength by 1% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. This actually goes up to 4.5%. So again, with 5 stacks, that's going to be over 20% haste, like 22.5% haste, I guess. And it just encourages you to manage your runic power and constantly weave those frost strikes in. Again, if you are a hater of the Breath of Sindragosa playstyle, this is a conduit for you, another one for you, which is going to encourage you not to stop, not to stop and just do Breath of Sindragosa, but to constantly weave those frost strikes in. So I think that one, again, is quite fun. I mean, a concern I would sort of have, again, with these is you have, the Frost Scythe talent as that alternate to Obliteration. You have the Glacial Advance talent, which is the sort of... well, I can't think of the word. It's the same sort of deal, but for runic power, right? Instead of Frost Strike, you use Glacial Advance in AoE. Instead of Obliterate, you're going to use Frost Scythe in AoE. And neither of those seem to be supported by the Conduits right now, which is kind of bad. So that's definitely something to be concerned about. But there you are. I think a pretty good set of Conduits on the whole for the Frost Death Knight. And there you go, guys. There are all the different pieces of the Frost Death Knight in Shadowlands. Well, how is the spec looking? Is it any fun? How's it playing? Well, the great news is this is a good expansion for the Death Knight is what it's looking like right now. I think the Frost Death Knight is a fantastic spec. I think it's really, really good. I would describe it as being sort of a cross between a Frost Mage with all the procs that it gets, that fun reactive proc-based gameplay, cross with like an Arms Warrior for the big meaty hits, kind of Mortal Strike-esque hits with Obliterate and Killing Machine procs, and then kind of the Fury Warrior, if you go for the dual wield Frost Death Knight, Fury Warrior, because it gives you that real sense of speed. It's certainly very interesting. I would certainly say, compared to Fury Warrior, single-minded Fury versus Titan's Grip, dual-wielding one-handed weapons versus dual-wielding two-handers. That didn't actually feel all that different. It's pretty much the same, honestly, with Fury Warrior. And to be honest with you, sometimes, unless you told me specifically what weapons I was using when I was playing Fury, I might not have even noticed. With Frost Death Knight, whether you're dual-wielding one-handers or just using a single two-hander, that is very noticeable. There's a very different feel to the spec. With the dual wield, it just feels much, much faster, and it feels much more like that Fury Warrior. With just using a big two-hander, it feels a lot slower. It feels much more like an Arms Warrior. I think it's pretty interesting, actually, to have that be like a baseline choice that you have just with the weapons that you're going to use. So I think that's kind of cool. The flip side to this, of course, is there is definitely more of a concern about balance. Again, using the Fury Warrior example, you're going to be fairly happy using either the two one-handers or the two-handers. Just on your personal preference, it's not really going to affect your damage very much at all. It's just which do you prefer. I think with Frost Death Knight, because it's a more substantial difference, obviously using a single two-hander, boosting your Obliterate damage, using two one-handers is going to give you access to more rune forges. That's to two rune forges instead of just one. That's a much bigger difference. So it could end up that like using a two-hander is better for a single target because you're just going for like those big obliterates. It's better for a single target, and dual wielding is better for AoE. So you may be, again, if you're like a gamer that likes optimizing, you may be forced into one of the other playstyle. Whereas you might prefer it being more like Fury Warrior, where it's more of just a cosmetic choice, a preference thing. I feel like there's more balance involved with the Frost DK, which is either good or bad depending on your preference. But yeah, I enjoyed both of them, and I certainly think the new rune forges are pretty cool and add a lot of potential. Another stellar thing about the Frost DK, in my opinion, is the Covenant abilities for Death Knight are great. The Kyrian one is pretty boring. We can leave that one aside, but then you've got three very interesting options. You've got the Night Fae, which I'm using in the dungeon footage that we have here today, which gives you it adds an extra very, very visually cool AoE ability to your core rotation, replacing Death and Decay, which is now baseline for the Frost DK. And that's awesome. It gives you that stacking strength bonus, which you can stack up with the already stacking strength bonus of Pillar of Frost, and then stack the two of those together to fire off extra big Frost Worms or extra big Chains of Ice with Cold Heart, or, you know, just stack it up with the Remorseless Winter, which itself can be stacking with the Gathering Storm. And you can have all these different stacking effects stacking together for stacks on stacks. I think it's quite nice, actually. I really enjoyed that. You've got the Venthyr, which have the Swarming Mist, you know, a decent AoE cooldown on 1 minute CD, which also provides you with loads and loads of runic power. A bit clunky. That was one thing I found without playing Breath of Sindragosa. I could find that it could be quite difficult to dump runic power as the Frost DK, especially because your only runic power dump is Frost Strike, which is a pure single target ability. So that was a bit weird for sure with Frost DK. I found I had too much runic power oftentimes. I mean, I'm not an expert at the spec, but I mean, that was certainly my impression of it. But yeah, Swarming Mist giving you loads of runic power as well could be very strong with the Breath of Sindragosa playstyle if you like that. Or then you got the Necrolord, which is a standout Covenant ability, I think, just across all specs in the entire game, all the classes. You know, on 2 minutes, just doing loads and loads of AoE damage, but more impressively, just gripping in an enemy every second that is between like 8 and 20 yards from you. So dirty, so dirty. I kind of like it now in the beta. I know when this actually goes live and I play against Death Knights in PvP, I'm going to hate this ability with a burning passion. Like, this just seems seems a nightmare for a lot of people. So I don't know. We laugh now, but we might cry later, is what I will say. But I think those are really interesting choices for the Frost DK, and there's definitely different circumstances where you're going to use each of those things. I will also, again, is returning to Breath of Sindragosa and like the discussion about runic power spending. I think that's definitely one weird area of the Frost DK a little bit. That's definitely a little bit weird. Yeah, it's just a bit strange. I do like that they're addressing it a bit with the conduits. Like, you've got several conduits which make Frost Strike a better button to press. At the same time, that those really don't synergize with Breath of Sindragosa at all. And I think when you take those, and then you also take the Empower Rune Weapon, reduce cooldown that Frost is getting now, I think they're definitely putting in a number of things to push you away from Breath of Sindragosa. And I'm actually totally fine with that. I know a lot of people, for some reason, absolutely despise it. They absolutely despise it. I think the reason for that, if I was to to make something up and justify it, and you can let me know if I'm right or wrong, I suspect that Breath of Sindragosa being that big 2 minute cooldown, kind of stopping your core Frost Strike spamming rotation to, you know, just generate as much runic power as you can to keep Breath of Sindragosa going to fight that drain. Because that was such a dominant talent for most of BFA, where it was just the best in every circumstance, and you just had to take Breath of Sindragosa, you had to play around it, and it turned Frost DK from being a very constant damage spec into this big 2 minute burst cooldown spec. Yeah, I think that it's just because it wasn't really an option, that was why people hated it. You were kind of forced to play it, and it was such a playstyle altering talent that, you know, if you're attracted to the core gameplay of Frost DK, that being forced to play Breath of Sindragosa put you off. And I totally understand that. I think that is bad design. So it's kind of nice to see some incentives and some bonuses to not playing that playstyle come in. Because I think in my opinion, the healthy place for Breath of Sindragosa to be, and those other level 50 talents to be, is to have different situations where different ones are good, you know? Like you say, okay, in this fight, there are ads that spawn in every 2 minutes. Hey, okay, then Breath of Sindragosa is going to feel pretty good. If it's in a pure single target fight, though, then it's going to feel a little bit silly. You know, or again, if you're Mythic Plus group, you're kind of build around like some big 2 minute cooldowns, then Breath of Sindragosa could feel good. But outside of that, it might feel good to not have to play it. So yeah, I think it's a good talent. It makes sense to be a good talent as an optional thing. But it's certainly interesting that there are aspects there that go straight against Breath of Sindragosa for sure. One concern I'd have as well is that there are also things that seem to go against other talents. So again, like the two-handed passive benefit to using a two-hander buffs Obliterate but doesn't buff Frost Scythe. There are several legendaries that work with Obliterate but not Frost Scythe. There's the conduits that buff Frost Strike but don't buff, you know, which go against Breath of Sindragosa. They also go against Glacial Advance, which is like your spammable sort of AoE spender for runic power. That's not included either. So there's a few weird things going on there, which is something to be concerned about, I would think. So there may be some more updates to the Frost DK to sort of accommodate those different things. But no, I think on the whole, to sum it up, I think Frost DK looks absolutely great. You know, you got some awesome baseline additions. Frostworm's Fury being baseline, that big 3 minute burst AoE, super badass. That's fantastic to have baseline. Anti-Magic Zone baseline is incredible. Bringing that massive party and raid utility, PvP utility as well. So strong. Really enhances it. I love having a ghoul back. as this little mini flavor cooldown. He's super cool. I love my ghoul. Hey, that rhymed. And yeah, it's gonna be a great expansion, I think, to be Frost. It's a really fun spec, fast, furious, feels badass, and again, you got the now two-handed Frost coming back, which is, I think, more iconic. You know, it gives you that Arthas vibe, which is awesome. Great confidence, fun legendaries, just fun everything. I think this is going to be a really, really good spec. You're going to enjoy this one. This is one of my favorite specs to play so far. It just flows well. It's super cool. Love it. So yeah, Frost DK, I think it's great. I think it's really, really good. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.